Alright guys and gals, Renegade on the Amstrad CPC is considered to be one of its very best arcade conversions. Hell, even one of its very best games period. It's marvellously presented right from its loading and title screens to its thumping soundtrack and gorgeously designed and animated sprites. Its tight fighting gameplay, many argue, and quite successfully too, surpasses the arcade original, and I'd be inclined to agree with them. The only thing perhaps letting it down was the omission of scrolling. Instead, the stages flicked between 5 areas, and the ability to run and also throw opponents. The throw move that the ZX Spectrum version did have was something that Specky fans would often use in playground arguments to say their version was better, because between the two excellent CPC and Specky conversions there was very little separating them. Both were missing the scrolling and run move, but the Specky had the throw move, which to be honest wasn't used that much. It was only in the 128K version, but was good fun to chuck opponents off the subway or docks. However, that has all changed now, because last month, out of nowhere, Renegade Reloaded arrived on the Amstrad scene, now with the running move and scrolling. And whoa, is it good! It now properly scrolls. Our hero can now run. He can also run and punch. He can also run and do a flying kick. Not only that, he can run, jump into a wall and do a flying kick off it and knock down enemies. How nuts is that? This is crazy levels of fun. Sorry Specky fans, but for me, this now beats it. Yes, the throw move is still missing sadly, but that may be coming in another later update to Renegade Reloaded, possibly, the coders tell me. You see, all this was possible thanks to two people, Gecko and Toto. Several years ago, the coder of Renegade on the Amstrad, John Branwood, very kindly provided the source code of the game to Gecko so he could port it to the Enterprise 128 computer, which he completed in 2020. Here it is running with graphics and additional sprite work by Toto, a name which will be familiar to those of you on the Amstrad scene for his work on the outstanding Alcon 2020 game recently and the R-Type 128K game a few years back. And you'll see how similar this Enterprise version is to the eventual updated Amstrad 1 Renegade Reloaded. Both computers are of a similar spec. I think the scrolling is a little smoother here, but it's such a nightmare and arseache to get running on the one and only Enterprise emulator I could find that, to be honest, it's just not worth the bother, and the Amstrad remains the preferable version. Anyway, after the Enterprise port was finished, Gecko asked Toto to help port his R-Type game to the Enterprise, but Toto countered with, let's get this ported to the CPC first, and here it is. Now, 128K of RAM on your Amstrad is required here because Gecko uses a triple buffer to do the scrolling by storing the screen background in memory to only redraw the changes. What I mean is one buffer or page is used to store the background and is prepared for the scroll, then copied to the next buffer, while the next is copied to the other, and so forth. Hope that makes sense. They also remapped the keys, which were notoriously a bit bad in the first place, something most home computer versions of Renegade suffered with. In game, use the cursor keys on the keyboard to move about, and now use the Z to hit left, X to jump, and C to hit right. Now, with this new stuff, does it make a difference to the gameplay? Yes, a huge difference. It really shifts the gameplay mechanic, and you find yourself using the run to take out enemies rather than shuffling around trying to juggle enemies so you can isolate one on their own to take out, or overutilise the powerful back kick move. Although, to balance things out, simply running into enemies doesn't do much or any damage to them, only maybe taking one hit point off them. And enemies have several hit points to actually kill them, meaning if that's all you do is run into them, well, you'll very quickly run out of time before you reach the boss of the level. But the running punches and kicks do some decent damage if you can find the right distance and get the right timing, but don't muck about, only doing this because again you'll run out of time. Use this to get an advantage and have a good mix of the usual attacks and pummeling enemies when they're on the floor. On the last level with the knife enemies, the run move isn't so useful. In fact, it can make you vulnerable and perhaps more dangerous to utilise. However, with practice, it can make taking out the final boss perhaps easier. Knock him down so you can stop him shooting, giving you much needed breathing space to take out his henchmen, but act quickly because he'll be back on his feet soon enough. But it's a tactic that can work, and you'll soon be grabbing your girlfriend's bum at the end of the game. Cheeky. But if you get stuck, there's a new range of cheat modes Hewco and Taito have put in the game, like the insane knock all enemies down in a row, which is activated by pressing the F1 key in game. Invulnerability is turned on by F2, as is infinite lives with F5 and infinite time by F6. Oh, I forgot to mention, you have to turn on the red blood by pressing F3 because it's blue blood by default. Ocean had to turn that off at the last minute because they feared it was too gory and it would get pulled from the shelves in WH Smith's or something at the time. Also, you can muck about with the animated sprites on the title screen by pressing F7 for the left sprite and F8 for the right sprite, if you feel inclined to do so. Now, apart from that throw move, all we need is for Hewco and Taito to sort out the joystick controls, or, perhaps better, allow you to redefine them before the game loads, and maybe add the sampled speech from the arcade. So now that we've had a good look at and review of the Amstrad version and Renegade Reloaded, how does it compare to all the other versions? Let's start with the original version of Renegade. No, I mean the real original version of Renegade, Neketsu Koa Kunio-kun, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which very loosely translates from Japanese to English as hot-blooded tough guy Kunio. This was an arcade coin-op from Technōs Japan, published by Taito in 1986, about a high school delinquent standing up to a bunch of gangs who have been bullying his friend Hiroshi. It then spawned a whole series of Kunio-kun games. But we're more interested in the Western localization of the game, which is, of course, renamed Renegade, and took on a very distinct look inspired by the film The Warriors. I mean, who doesn't love the frickin' Warriors? Gameplay wise, he takes inspiration from the film Enter the Dragon and of course earlier coin-op Kung Fu Master, but substantially moves on the whole beat 'em up genre. It's no surprise that the coder went on to make Double Dragon next. For controls, having separate buttons for jump and an attack left and an attack right takes a little getting used to, but caused problems when it came to porting to home systems, certainly. It's got an interesting isometric perspective to it that I often overlook, but it does make it a bit more visually interesting. And it certainly was a wise move updating it for a Western audience. The grimy subway first level here leaves quite the impression, as does the sampled speech of "Get lost, punk!" Get lost, punk! When you die. It does play well, but do you know what? I still kind of prefer the gameplay of the Amstrad version, and maybe the next version coming up. But alright, let's move on to the first home conversion, the ZX Spectrum, the big rival here. And there is no denying this is a brilliant conversion and up there as one of the best on the Specky, and runs the original Amstrad version very close. Some could very much argue it beats the CPC version by having the slightly larger screen size and the ability to redefine keys. But it's let down by a few things, like you need to have 128k of memory, otherwise you miss out on that throw move, and the exterior section of the fourth and final level, strangely. I don't think the sprites move around as fast as the Amstrad version though, and some may argue it doesn't look as nice as the Amstrad version either. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's up to you what you think looks nicer. There's still some great sprite and animation work here. It looks absolutely awesome on the Specky and plays absolutely brilliantly. I'll let you boys and girls decide what you think in the comments. Now let's move on to the Commodore 64 version. It's a decent effort, but really I think this Commodore 64 can do much better. The combat is not satisfactory, and it's hard to describe why. I guess you just have to let each enemy get up close to you, and by the time you've done that and entered into fisticuffs with them, the other enemy has already sneaked up behind you. The timing is just all wrong here with the code and how the enemies move around, and the hit detection just feels a bit off and weird. And it looks like the game engine is limited to only 3 enemy sprites at a time. The music just sounds I don't know why they chose that weird sounding instrument and tone for it when the SID chip can produce such wonderful sounds. It just sounds awful. A simple change of the tone used for the melody and it would have been fine. Oh, and this suffers from weird controls too, so it's joystick only for moving about, but with attack moves on the keyboard that can't be redefined. So if you look in the top left corner of your keyboard, so the back tick key for attack left, if you're on an emulator, which would have been the backspace key on your real Commodore 64 keyboard, with the number 1 for jump and the number 2 for attack right. Yeah, meh. Okay, next. Now here's an unusual 8-bit home computer, the Thomson M05. Now I don't know much about this computer, except that it was kind of like France's equivalent to the BBC Micro in some respects. Not in terms of its specifications, because it appears to be quite an underpowered computer. Rather, the French government tried to get it into lots of schools. Now, this appears to be a very slow Specky port, but it just looks like they ripped the graphics, sprites and animations across. Everything else seems to be bespoke code. And yeah, you can see the results for yourselves. It seems like the Thomson M05 might be situated somewhere between the Specky and MSX1 for its games, but this isn't a great version. Onto the Apple II, and from what I now know of this version, it went unreleased, and it's not bad really considering the hardware, although the sprites move around rather jittery. This is the only 8-bit home computer version with the run move, but it is based on the NES version, which we'll see shortly, and like that NES version, it isn't really a true conversion of the arcade original, rather it's based on it and goes in its own direction. As you'll see, we actually go into and inside the subway train next, and then after we fight a boss, and then go on to totally different levels. It feels more like a completely different game rather than a true port and conversion of the arcade original, but we'll talk more about that later. Anyway, let's talk about the 16-bit conversions, and we'll start with the Atari ST. And good lord, whilst the sprites and graphics are somewhat faithful to the arcade, albeit still a bit rough. Talking of rough, what is with that frame rate and scrolling? This is a 16-bit machine. I mean, there's really not much pushing it here. The controls are god awful, and for some reason you can easily activate the punching enemy on the floor move when there's no downed enemy and you're just moving about. The combat is absolutely rubbish, as is the enemy AI, and whilst the tune is pleasant enough, it's not the Renegade music we've grown to love, and it doesn't fit the game at all. I mean, they've got everything wrong and is a complete disaster all round. But if you think it couldn't get any worse, just wait until you see the Amiga version. Oh dear God. Amiga owners had to suffer the indignity of a terrible ST port that was somehow worse. It's even slower, laggier, and I can't even say the music was better. Maybe the sound effects were slightly better, but that's it. Jesus wept. Blimey. Alright, moving swiftly on. PC DOS. Well, what can you say here? It tried? It's as slow and laggy as the Amiga version, maybe worse, I don't know. But this is limited to only 2 enemy sprites at a time. And the graphics are a horrible mess of colours that initially made me think it might have glitched loading on the VGA option. It's also too hard. The tune is passable, I suppose, for PC DOS. But yeah, I mean, this one is also best avoided. How very disappointing. Right, we'll move on to the consoles, and it's NES time. Remember that Apple II version? Well, anyway, it was based on this. And as mentioned before, this is not really, I suppose, a true port of the arcade original, but inspired by, I guess. It's a pretty good game though. Pretty good. Lots of moves, including the run move, and there is a Japanese version just like the arcade called Neketsu Kowo Kunio-kun. But elsewhere it's Renegade and all warriors-y. But yeah, you move inside the subway train and fight more guys, and then you move outside the train to the other platform on the other side of the train, and then you fight a boss. And then the second part of the second level includes a side-scrolling motorbike chase where you're kicking punks off their bikes, so that's pretty cool. So Nintendo again going their own way with a port of an arcade game, which is pretty common for them. Moving on to the Master System version, which is very similar again to the NES one, and it came out a lot later, almost 6 years in fact, in 1993, and features some enhanced graphics and more cutscenes. It definitely looks nicer actually, and much more colourful. Weirdly though, this apparently, according to some sources on the internet, only got released in Europe, Australia and Brazil. Why they didn't bother with the America and Japan market is baffling, because this is pretty decent and that missed out on 2 big markets who knew this property well. Strange. But 1993 was quite late in the day for the Master System. But that's it. Discounting the NES, Master System and Apple II versions, which aren't really a true port of Renegade, I think clearly it leaves the Amstrad and Speccy versions as the best of the bunch. I would have wimped out before and left the original Amstrad version and Speccy one as a tie between the two, but with Renegade Reloaded, is it better now? Is it the best? Maybe I'll leave it up to you guys and girls in the comments to decide. At the end of the day, who really cares? It's just games. It's just games. Most of us who grew up with these machines are in our 40s now, maybe in our 50s, and have hopefully left such playground arguments behind us. Or have we? Which is better, Amstrad or Spectrum? But such videos like these are fun to do, otherwise why would I make something like this? Well, primarily to celebrate the hard work of Hewco and Taito here, and hopefully to encourage them to do more things like this. I mean, hint hint, Gryzor, from the exact same Ocean team behind Renegade, that desperately needs scrolling and is missing a whole friggin' level. And also, I've done this video because it's nice to bask in a warm blast of nostalgia, and I was intrigued to see all the different versions of Renegade and how they stacked up. It's interesting to see how such humble computers like the rubber-keyed Spectrum and the 464 held their own, and in fact, I think their gameplay surpassed, arguably, the arcade original. But I'm going to call it, and say for now, I think Renegade Reloaded on the Amstrad gets the honours for me, because just how crazy fun it is now, with all the flying kicks and running punches and all that stuff. But you let me know in the comments what you think, and I hope you all enjoyed this video for what it is, just a bit of fun. And if you take it too seriously, you can
get lost, punk.
Only kidding, of course. So, thanks for watching, and please consider supporting me on Patreon for more content like this, and give us a thumbs up on the video if you enjoyed watching it. Cheers, and goodbye. Bye! So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please click a like below, leave a comment, and also subscribe if you haven't already. And over that way, there's another video for you to check out. Zypho, out.